After decades of sitting on this bench, I've been called everything: cold, ruthless, a machine in a black robe, and I've worn those labels like armor. When you spend your life wading through the wreckage of human error, custody battles where children are used as pawns, civil disputes where ego matters more than the truth, you learn to build walls. You learn to silence the noise so you can find the law. I've always believed that the law is the great equalizer. It doesn't care about your bank account or your background. It cares about facts. That's the only way a courtroom functions. But every now and then, a case pierces those walls. It was a Tuesday, late November, the kind of day where the rain in Manhattan feels like it's trying to wash away the city's sins. I was halfway through a list of minor civil filings, nothing that would make the news, nothing that would change the world, just the grit and grind of daily life in the city. I was ready for the usual excuses, the usual nonsense, and I had my pen ready to dismiss whatever couldn't be proven. Then she walked in. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, clutching a backpack that looked twice her size. She wasn't alone, but she looked like the one leading the way. Behind her was a woman, walking with a heavy, rhythmic gait, the walk of someone who hasn't slept in days. The bailiff called the name Maria Torres. The mother stepped forward, her eyes glazed over, staring at the floor, not at me. I don't like it when people look at the floor. I like to be looked at. I want to see the person who is standing in my courtroom. I started with my usual opening, firm and direct. "Good morning, Miss Torres. You're here about a lease violation. Let's see what we can," the little girl interrupted. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just leaned into the microphone, her voice small but piercingly clear. "I'm sorry, Judge," she said. Her eyes locked onto mine. No fear, just a strange, quiet gravity. "I'm here by myself. My mom is sleeping in the car, and I can't wake her up." The entire courtroom went still. The air changed. For the first time in years, the Judge Judy persona, the one that thrives on control and sharp, quick retorts, just vanished. I looked at the mother, whose knees were literally shaking, and then back at the child. The silence was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a verdict, but this was different. This was the sound of a human tragedy unfolding in real time, right under the fluorescent lights of my bench. I want to share this story because it's not just about the law, it's about the silent tragedies we walk past every single day. If you're new to this channel, hit that subscribe button right now. You're about to see a side of the courtroom that never makes the highlight reel. Stay with me, because this was the day the law had to step aside for the truth. I looked at Henderson, my bailiff, a man who has been by my side for 15 years, a man who knows the look on my face better than he knows his own. I didn't have to say a word. I didn't have to use my gavel. My eyes told him everything. "Get down there," I said, my voice low, stripped of that courtroom boom. "Now, bring the medics. Do not wait for a second opinion. Move." Henderson didn't hesitate. He was out of the courtroom before the last word left my lips. The silence that followed was heavy. It was a suffocating kind of quiet, the kind you only get when people realize they are standing on the edge of something irreversible. I looked back at the little girl. She was still holding her backpack straps, her knuckles white. She wasn't crying, which somehow made it worse. A child who cries is a child who is scared. A child who is silent like this is a child who has been forced to grow up too fast. "What's your name, sweetheart?" I asked. My voice felt foreign in my own throat. "Lily," she whispered. "Okay, Lily. You sit right there." I pointed to the chair where the defendant, the woman who was currently fighting a frivolous lease complaint, had been standing just moments ago. It felt absurd. The woman who brought the complaint, a landlord looking to squeeze an extra month's rent out of a tenant, looked at me with an expression of pure irritation. She wanted her eviction notice. She wanted her day in court. I looked at her, and for the first time in my career, I felt a flash of pure, unadulterated rage. "If you make one sound," I said, not looking at her but making sure the threat hung in the air like a blade. "If you make one sound about your precious lease, I will have you removed and fined for contempt so fast your head will spin. We are dealing with a life here. Sit down and be quiet." She went white. She sat. I turned back to the gallery. Usually, that room is full of people waiting for their turn, waiting for a win, waiting for the system to validate them. But today, they were leaning forward, faces tight with shared terror. We were all parents. We were all people who knew that the distance between a normal Tuesday and an absolute nightmare is just a heartbeat. I stood up, which I never do. I walked to the edge of the bench, peering over the wood, not as a judge, but as a person watching the front entrance of the courthouse, waiting for a sign. "Lily," I said again, softening my tone as much as I could. "Your mom, has she been sleeping a lot?" The girl looked at me, her eyes clouded with a confusion that was harder to watch than any sob. "She's been tired, Judge. She says she's just resting, but she hasn't eaten since yesterday." She gave me the last of her crackers. My stomach dropped. I've seen it all. The fraud, the greed, the manipulation. But you cannot fake that level of raw, unintentional honesty. I sat back down, not in my chair, but on the edge of the bench. I needed a moment to breathe, to push back the stinging in my own eyes. My clerk, Sarah, was already on the phone with the building security, her face deathly pale. I knew what she was doing. She was making sure the paramedics had the right entrance. The courtroom felt like it was shrinking. The clock on the wall seemed to move in slow motion. Tick, tick, tick. I thought about the files stacked on my desk, the traffic tickets, the noise complaints, the problems that people treat like the end of the world. Compared to what was happening in that parking lot, everything I had done that morning felt like paper, like dust, like nothing at all. The sirens started then, that wailing, high-pitched scream that cuts through the Manhattan noise. It wasn't just the sound of an emergency, it was the sound of a failure, a systemic, colossal failure. I looked at the landlord again. She was shifting in her seat, checking her watch, a watch that probably cost more than the mother's total monthly rent. I tapped my microphone. "If anyone in this room thinks this is the time to check the time," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "I suggest you exit now. You won't like what happens if you stay." She froze. Henderson returned, his face grim. "Judge, they're with the mother now. She's suffering from severe malnutrition and exhaustion. They're transporting her to Bellevue." Lily didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just watched the door. It was the most heartbreaking thing I've ever seen. A child so used to her world falling apart that she'd forgotten how to react to the earthquake. I signaled for a recess, but I didn't go to chambers. I stayed right there. I beckoned Lily over. She walked up to the bench, small against the massive wood. "Lily," I said, and for once, I didn't know what to do with my hands. "I'm a judge. I rule. I sentence. I don't usually comfort children in the middle of a civil docket, but the law is only as strong as the people it protects. And right now, the law was looking at a 7-year-old who knew more about survival than I ever would. "Is there anyone else?" I asked. "Any family? A grandmother? An aunt?" She shook her head. "It's just us, Judge. We stay in the car when the money runs out. Mommy says it's an adventure. An adventure. That's what a mother tells her child so she doesn't have to see the terror in her own eyes." I felt that familiar heat in my chest, the rage that isn't for the courtroom, but for the world outside it. I looked at the file, the lease, the eviction, the cold, hard numbers on the page. They looked like blood. "Henderson," I called out, my voice raspy. "Clear the court. All cases. Every single one of them. Reschedule. I'm not doing anything else today. And get me the social services liaison on the line. Now." The courtroom erupted in a low murmur of confusion, but I didn't care. The rules of the courtroom are designed to keep the peace, but there is no peace when a child is hungry. Today, the law would serve the person, not the paper. The sirens faded into the distance, leaving a void in the room that felt heavier than the noise. I sat back in my chair, but I wasn't Judge Judy anymore. I was just a woman witnessing a system that had failed so spectacularly it made my skin crawl. The paramedics had taken Maria, and Lily Brave, quiet Lily, was still sitting in that oversized chair, her eyes tracing the pattern on the floor. I turned my attention back to the landlord. She was still sitting there, arms crossed, looking at the door as if the delay was an inconvenience to her portfolio. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. My voice dropped to a level that made every single person in the gallery lean in. "Madam," I said, "you came here today expecting a judgment. You wanted me to sign a paper that would have stripped this child and her mother of the only roof they had, which, as it turns out, was a car. Do you know what you are?" She opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. "Don't answer. You are a symptom. You are the reason people lose faith in this system. You saw a woman who was clearly struggling, who was clearly failing, and instead of a phone call, instead of a moment of human decency, you chose to drag her into a courtroom to demand an extra cent. You are legally correct, perhaps. You are within your rights to seek what you are owed. But in my courtroom, being legally correct is not the same as being a human being." I could see the gallery shifting. Some were nodding. The air was thick with the weight of the moral judgment being passed, And it wasn't about the law, it was about the lack of spirit behind it. I looked at my clerk. Sarah, find out where the car is. If it's been towed, find the lot. If it's still on the street, get the keys. Whatever belongings are in there, I want them tagged, stored, and protected. This is not just a lease case anymore. This is a property guardianship matter. I looked back at Lily. Lily, tell me about your school. I needed to hear a child's voice. I needed to wash the taste of that landlord's greed out of the room. She looked up, the sadness in her eyes competing with a sudden flickering hope. I like my teacher, she said. She gives us gold stars when we read. Well, I said, feeling that familiar steel in my spine, I think we're going to make sure you get a lot more than just gold stars today. I knew the road ahead for them would be brutal. Bellevue, social services, the bureaucracy, it's a meat grinder. But today, they wouldn't walk out of here defeated. Not on my watch. I wasn't going to let this be another statistic in a dusty ledger. I was going to turn this courtroom into a lifeline, whether the bureaucracy liked it or not. The social worker on the other end of the line was doing exactly what I expected, reading from a script. Judge, the protocols are clear. We have to assess the mother's cognitive state. We have to clear the backlog. It's a standard intake procedure. I let her finish, tapping my pen against the bench. When she stopped, I leaned in. Let me be very, very clear, I said, my voice dropping to that lethal whisper that has ended many a career in my courtroom. I am not asking for a lecture on your manual. I am telling you what is going to happen. You have a child sitting in my courtroom who has been living in a car. You have a mother at Bellevue who is malnourished. If I don't see a caseworker at my chambers by 4:00 p.m., you and I are going to have a very long, very public conversation about failure in this city. Am I understood? I didn't wait for her to answer. I hung up. People think the law is a static thing, a book of rules written in stone. It isn't. The law is a living, breathing entity, and it is only as good as the people who enforce it. For 25 years, I've seen people try to manipulate that system to hurt others, to steal, to lie. But today, I was manipulating the system to keep a human soul from slipping through the cracks. It was the real work. It wasn't about a verdict or a fine. It was about preventing a tragedy. I looked over at Lily. She had fallen asleep in the witness chair, her head resting on her backpack. She looked so small, so defenseless against the machinery of the world. I found myself thinking about my own life in Queens, the quiet stability of my father, the dentist, the fierce, unyielding structure my mother built for us. We never had to worry about where we would sleep. We never had to worry about whether a meal would appear. I took that for granted for 30 years, until I sat on this bench and saw that for so many people, the world is not a secure place. It is a minefield. I realized then that the TV fame, the cameras, the catchphrases, that was all performance. This was the substance. This was why I studied the law, to look at a situation that the system deemed minor or routine and say, no, not today. I spent the next hour reviewing case files I had already cleared, looking for anything, a contact, a resource, a charity I had worked with that could help Lily. My clerk, Sarah, joined me, dropping a cup of tea on my desk without a word. She knew. When you see a child losing their childhood in front of your eyes, the coffee stops being about caffeine and starts being about stamina. We had a long night ahead, and I wasn't leaving until I knew where Lily was going to lay her head that night. The social worker didn't come alone. She came with the look of someone who had seen exactly the kind of devastation I was describing. I didn't give her the chance to be bureaucratic or to hide behind a manual. I led her straight to my chambers where Lily was eating a sandwich, the first real meal I'd seen her have all day, and watching a cartoon on my laptop. When she saw the social worker, she didn't jump. She didn't look for her mother. She just looked at me with those wide, trusting eyes. That was the moment it hit me. This child had been conditioned to expect help from strangers because her mother was no longer capable of providing the safety she needed. I walked back into the courtroom to finish the session, but the energy had shifted. The landlord was still there, fidgeting with her purse. She looked small now. The bravado of the eviction filing had evaporated in the face of what she had almost done. I called her up. "Madam," I said, not using her name, because in that moment she was just a person who had lost her way. "You came in here expecting a judgment. You wanted me to sign a paper that would have stripped a child and her mother of the only roof they had, which, as it turns out, was a car. Do you know what you are?" She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. "Don't answer. You are a symptom. You are the reason people lose faith in this system. You saw a woman who was clearly struggling, who was clearly failing, and instead of a phone call, instead of a moment of human decency, you chose to drag her into a courtroom to demand an extra cent. You are legally correct, perhaps. You are within your rights to seek what you are owed. But in my courtroom, being legally correct is not the same as being a human being. She went white. She sat. I could see the gallery shifting. Some were nodding, their faces tight with shared terror. We were all parents. We were all people who knew that the distance between a normal Tuesday and an absolute nightmare is just a heartbeat. I tapped my microphone. If anyone in this room thinks this is the time to check the time, I said, my voice dangerously calm, I suggest you exit now. You won't like what happens if you stay. She froze, realizing the power dynamic in the room had shifted permanently away from her privilege and toward the reality of the situation. The rules are written by people, I continued, and people have the capacity for mercy. If you had knocked on that door instead of filing a complaint, if you had asked, is everything okay, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But you didn't. You saw a problem to be solved, not a human to be helped. That is a failure of character. And character is the one thing a judge can't fix, no matter how much time we spend on the bench. The case was dismissed, obviously. Not just dismissed, but sealed. And I made sure she knew exactly where the line was drawn. She left, not with her rent, but with a stark reminder. The world doesn't belong to the people who hold the keys. It belongs to the people who use them to open doors for others. By 5 p.m., the courtroom was empty, save for the hum of the HVAC and the low, steady clicking of the clock. The social worker finally returned, looking like she'd been through a war. She wasn't holding a clipboard anymore. She was holding a file with a shaky hand. Judge, she said, her voice softer than it had been all day. The mother, Maria, she's awake. And she's asking for Lily. They've stabilized her, but it's not just the exhaustion. It's what she's been running from. I didn't ask what she was running from. I knew. In this city, you're either running towards something or away from something you can't name without breaking. I looked at Lily, who had woken up and was sitting at the defense table, coloring on the back of a legal pad with a blue highlighter. She looked so small, so completely out of place in the sterile, imposing environment of my courtroom. Is she safe? I asked, cutting straight to the point. For tonight, the social worker replied. But we're looking at long-term placement if Maria doesn't have a stable residence. The system. You know how it is, Judge. I did know how it was. I knew the system was a sieve. It caught the rocks but let the sand slip through. And these people, Maria, Lily, were the sand. They were the ones who fell through the cracks of every protocol and procedure we had. I stood up and walked over to the defense table, sitting down right in front of Lily. Lily, I said, catching her attention. She looked up, her blue-stained fingers frozen in midair. Your mommy is awake. And she's asking for you. The reaction was instantaneous. The child in her vanished. She dropped the highlighter, her face hardening into an expression of fierce, adult-like determination. She didn't ask if she could go, or if it was okay. She just grabbed her backpack and stood up. Can I go now, Judge? I looked at the social worker. Take her. And listen to me, don't put them in the system. Don't put them in a shelter where they'll get lost. Find a placement, a transition program, something that keeps them together. If you need a signature for the emergency funding, I'll sign it. If you need a referral to a private charity that actually cares, I have a list. I'm not asking you to break the rules, but I am asking you to find the humanity within them. Do not let this child leave your sight until she is in her mother's arms. It wasn't a court order. It was a demand of the heart, and for the first time in her career, I suspect, the social worker understood that some rules are meant to be bent so that the foundations don't break. They walked out hand in hand, leaving me alone in the vast echoing silence of the room where I usually held all the power. And yet, for the first time in years, I felt like I hadn't just presided over a case. I had participated in a rescue. The lights in the courtroom had been dimmed by the time I gathered my things. I sat in my chambers, the silence of the building settling around me. Usually I'd be eager to get home, to Jerry, to the normalcy of my own life. But tonight, I stayed. I looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline. A million windows, a million lives, a million stories, many of them as fragile as lilies. People ask me, Judge, don't you get tired of it? The endless parade of problems, the greed, the lying, the selfishness? And I tell them the same thing. If I allowed myself to see only the mess, I wouldn't be able to do the work. The secret isn't to look away. It's to look through. You have to look past the suit, the attitude, the legal arguments, and find the person beneath. Because more often than not, the person is struggling, not just with a court case, but with the weight of an entire existence. Today reminded me of why I fought to get on that bench in the first place. It wasn't for the title. It wasn't for the power. It was for the moments when the law can actually be a shield rather than a weapon. Maria and Lily will have a long road, and the system is still a grind, but for one night, they aren't sleeping in a car. For one night, they are warm. And that, in the grand scheme of a judicial career, is the only verdict that truly matters. We live in a world that is obsessed with power: who has it, how to get it, and how to keep it. We see it in the news, in the way people treat those beneath them, in the way names and connections are used to bypass the rules. But power is nothing if it doesn't serve. If your power doesn't help the person standing across from you, you have no power. You only have influence, and influence without character is a hollow shell. Lily didn't care about my title. She didn't care about the fame. She cared that someone saw her. She cared that someone heard the truth. That is the essence of justice. It's not about the gavel or the robes. It's about the eyes. Can you see the person? Can you see the pain? If you can, then you are a judge, whether you wear the robe or not. This job has demanded everything of me: my temper, my patience, my time, but it has also given me back something I can never repay: the constant, vivid reminder of what it means to be human. This was the real work, the work that doesn't make the headlines, the work that doesn't get a standing ovation, the work that just is. Because when you strip away the pomp, the procedure, and the pride, all that is left is the person standing before you, waiting to be seen. And if you are lucky enough to be in a position to help, you don't look away, you act. I walked out of the courthouse, the cold air hitting my face, a stark reminder of the realities out there. I thought about the next morning, the next docket, the next set of faces that would pass through my doors. I would be sharp, I would be fast, and I would be no nonsense. But I would be watching, I would be listening, and I would be ready to see. Because justice isn't a final outcome. Justice is a choice we make every single day to prioritize the person over the paper. And that is a choice I intend to keep making for as long as I have the breath to do it.